I read 71 books in 2023, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 that I read over the course of the year. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be saying, 2023? Bit late, mate. To which I would respond, in the words of Neville Chamberlain, don't worry about it. I read a lot of Stephen King last year, and so to keep it fair, I've decided to only include one Stephen King book in this list. And so let's get started. In no particular order, one of the best books that I read last year was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This story centers around an astronaut called Ryland Grace who wakes up in a spaceship millions of miles from home with no memory of who he is. And then slowly over time, he starts to recollect who he is, what is his mission, why is he doing this, and it's pretty epic. I think that Andy Weir is one of these writers who's really good, kind of like Michael Crichton in a way with Jurassic Park. He's really good at mixing real science with just made up science. And so he blends it in a way where you're not sure where the lines blur. And so when you're reading it, it's filled with enough real science that it can kind of make you feel as though you're a bit smarter than you are. Like, yeah, I get this. Astrophage, right? Yeah. It just gives it that kind of feeling of authenticity. Like, this could really happen. Do you remember when Jurassic Park came out and everyone was going, you can really do this. You could actually bring dinosaurs back, and everyone was convinced. That's what this feels like. It feels like something that could really happen. But, I don't want you to think that it's just all like technical jargon and stuff like that. There is some of that, but there's a lot of heart. There's a lot of humor to it. We get to see life back on Earth as we jump back and forward in time with Ryland Grace, as he starts to remember what happened before the mission, and then he's in the mission. There's a lot of very interesting characters. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there's a lot of really fascinating characters in this book. And I think it really is one of those books. It's quite a rare thing, but I think it is one of those books that anyone would enjoy. Next up is Salem's Lot by Stephen King. This is a story about a writer called Ben Mears who returns to his childhood town of Jerusalem's Lot, aka Salem's Lot, and he's there to kind of find inspiration for his new book, but then soon he starts to discover that the people that live in this small American town start to go missing under mysterious circumstances, and it's not long before he realizes that something supernatural is going on, and that this town, just beneath the surface, there are creatures that exist that are snatching people up. It's genuinely, I think, quite frightening. This is easily the best and the scariest vampire book that I've ever read. I also read Dracula last year, and I preferred this. I thought this was better, although it does obviously borrow heavily from Bram Stoker's work, of course. It's just classic Stephen King, where an ordinary setting gets turned on its head, and it's I think as much about psychological horror as it is supernatural. This next one, I couldn't really decide between The Blade itself or The Last Argument of Kings. These are two books out of the trilogy. I also enjoyed the middle book as well. I like the whole trilogy, but I think in the end, I am going to go with The Last Argument of Kings. This is a grimdark fantasy with political intrigue and some of the best battle scenes that I've ever read in any genre. It was just really vivid. Probably the best thing about this trilogy is the characters. Glokta, he's the Inquisitor. He's a personal favorite of mine. I think that's a pretty commonly held opinion. But just every character is interesting. It's told from multiple perspectives, and there was never a point where I turned to the next chapter and saw, oh, it's from this character. This is my least favorite one. Do you know what I mean? That just didn't happen, as it does happen in some series. That isn't the case with this book. It's just every character is fascinating. Every character's journey is really interesting. And yeah, I loved it. There's also some genuinely laugh out loud moments, which is kind of rare, in a fantasy book. The characters all are morally grey. They're probably on the darker side of grey, and their choices matter. You feel as though if you go down this direction, there will be consequences. I'm really looking forward to reading further into the series because although this is a complete trilogy, it's also part of a larger series and a larger world of books. And so I can't wait to dive into Joe Abercrombie's world and get stuck in more. Apparently, it just gets better and better as the books go on, which is difficult for me to imagine, honestly. This might be my favorite fantasy trilogy. I'm not sure. I need a little bit more time to mull it over, I think. Next up is Ian Reid's I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This was my favorite book of 2023 for about 6 months because I read it really early in the year and I was thinking nothing's going to beat this. Maybe a couple of books came later in the year that did, but this was a favorite for a long time. And it starts off, it's a psychological thriller. It starts off with a young woman who's going to visit her boyfriend's parents in a kind of run-down farm setting. Ian Reid has this way of capturing that kind of claustrophobic anxiety where you just feel as though there's no escape, but you're not even sure what you're supposed to be escaping from. You're so deep in the protagonist's head that you feel their uneasiness and you feel their anxiety and you feel their confusion. It kind of makes you see the world through the main character's eyes. And it's the kind of book that, honestly, I don't think anyone could put down because you just want to know, like, what is going on? Why? I'm afraid, but I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to be afraid of. Where is the danger? How do I get out of this? It's kind of a short book as well. You could probably read this in a couple of afternoons. So yeah, this was a big favorite of mine for 2023. Next up is The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. It's a science fiction novel and it's the first book in a trilogy. This book starts off in the Chinese Cultural Revolution and it connects those events to a mysterious video game called Three Body, and then it connects those events to kind of like a secret military project. There's a lot of mystery in this book. Because this book is so shrouded in mystery, I don't want to give too much away, but the basic story is that scientists all over the world are starting to unalive themselves. Something is attacking or something or someone is attacking the scientific community and it's causing a lot of distress and a lot of confusion. And yeah, so scientists are being driven to ending themselves. There's actually a Netflix series that's coming out based on this book and this trilogy. So before everyone starts talking about it, I would recommend picking this book up because it's actually fantastic. Yeah, I don't know if I prefer this or Project Hail Mary from this year. But this is phenomenal. And then plus you get to act all smart. When everyone's talking about it on Netflix, you can go, oh yeah, it wasn't exactly like that in the books, because, you know, at the end of the day, that's why we read books, isn't it? To be superior to other people. So next up is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This was my most pleasant surprise of the year. I went into this, I basically read and reviewed this as part of my 10 classic horror novels for the month of October, where I read and reviewed 10 classic horror novels. And this was fantastic. This book, I thought I knew what this book was going to be about, and I was just completely wrong. The way that the monster is portrayed in popular culture is so different to the monster that we find in this book that was actually written in 1818, which that blew my mind as well. I thought this was written in the late 1800s, early 1900s, 1818, my brother. What? This book was so moving, so emotional. It's about isolation and revenge and what is the responsibility of a parent to their child and what is the responsibility of a child to their parent. One of the marks of a truly great book is how often you think about it after you've read it. And I think about this book all the time. Next up in my top 10 of 2023 is Swan Song by Robert McCammon. This was a lot like The Stand, if you've ever read Stephen King's The Stand, which is one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time. it's set in a world, it's set in America, where there's been a big explosion and now we're living in a post-apocalyptic terrain. The strength of this book, I think, is in its characters. You've got a young girl who has a special gift to humanity called Swan. She's accompanied by an ex-pro wrestler, and actually, no, I think he is still a pro wrestler, called Josh Hutchins, aka Black Frankenstein. Epic name. You've got this little psycho kid called Roland who sees this new dark world as his playground, and this whole scenario is a big game. You can imagine the sort of stuff that he's getting up to. And then you've also got a ex-military man who I think served in Vietnam called Colonel Macklin, and he has an alter ego called the Shadow Soldier who's always trying to push him on to do the things that are necessary, the things that he needs to do to survive. Epic cast of characters, and it just goes on and on and on. But yeah, if you like The Stand, you're going to like this as well. It's very similar. Next up is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was another book that I read as part of my 10 classic horror novels for October. And again, it's a book that I thought I knew what the story was going to be about, but from the very first page, I was completely surprised that this is not told from the perspective of Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. It's told from the perspective of his lawyer friend, an acquaintance. And so, yeah, really interesting. I do feel as though this book is so famous now that everybody knows the twist. I won't say it just in case you don't, but you do know what this is about. But anyway, really atmospheric. Somehow the author is able to capture the essence of Victorian London, you know, the fog, the cobbled streets, the darkness lurking around every corner, but with a kind of facade of civility. You know, it's just, it was a lot of fun. If you're a big fan of atmospheric writing, you're probably going to like this. Again, it was another surprise, just like Frankenstein, it was another surprise. Next up is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is a book that has been on my radar for a really long time, and I kind of put off reading it in a way because everyone warned me it was just so dark. And reading it, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a post-apocalyptic book. It's set again in America, just an ash-covered America, everything bleak and dreary, and people acting out the worst versions of themselves as desperation drives them to do things that are truly animalistic. But at its heart, there is still a beautiful story about a father's love for his son, and that for me was really touching. And in a really weird way, I found this book to be heartwarming. I know that's crazy, but yeah, I did find this book to be heartwarming in certain scenes where the father was making sacrifices for his son. It was just, you know, how much can you love a person? How much can you really love a person? And this dad really loves his kid. So you probably noticed that I like a lot of dark fiction, but this book was a bit of a change of pace for me. It's Beartown by Frederick Buckman. This is set in a small working class town that's kind of been in decline for years. And the only thing that's holding this town together is a love of ice hockey, and they are strongly, firmly dependent on the success of their local ice hockey team. If the team does well, then the town is happy, but not just that. It's not just that they're happy about the team performing well. Also, if the team has a lot of success, then it will attract investors to the team, and it will attract businesses to the team, and more population and more tourists and all that kind of thing. So yeah, really interesting dynamic. The story's told kind of like through different perspectives, from the players on the team to the coaches to the townspeople, and then one day something happens, an event happens, and I won't say what it is, but it kind of splits the team and the town in half. as people take different positions. This is just typical Fredrik Backman stuff, you know, complicated but heartwarming Swedish stuff, you know? It's nice. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see the list of books that I'm most excited to read in 2024, then you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and happy reading.